Good morning. This is Mukul Yudhvir Singh, and I, on behalf of the entire Mobility Outlook team, welcome you to a day filled with knowledge and deep insights into the automobile world of tomorrow. Titled Powertrain of the Future, experts from the automobile industry will be shedding light on what the future beholds for the powertrain vertical of the mobility sector. We sincerely thank Infineon Technologies in helping us to enable this virtual event, and I request all of the people sitting in the audience to not hesitate in asking questions using the Q&A box located at the downside of their windows. Our experts will answer your questions whenever time permits. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Deepanshu Dev Sharma, Editor, Mobility Outlook, to deliver the welcome address. Deepanshu, all over to you now.
Thank you. Thank you, Mukul. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first edition of Powertrain of the Future, a conference we have curated to discuss and deliberate on the progress, possibilities, and potential of automotive powertrains, both in internal combustion engine as well as electric vehicles. For over a century now, fossil fuels have generated most of the energy required to propel our vehicles. For that matter, fossil fuels have even powered our homes and businesses. Unfortunately, using fossil fuels for energy has also dealt a tremendous blow to the environment and humanity in general, with air pollution, water pollution, land degradation, and global warming threatening to do more harm to the planet if we do not switch toward a clean energy future. Specific to the automotive industry, fossil fuels continue to be the most convenient onboard energy source for vehicles in terms of energy density and refueling time. And it's incumbent upon the industry to continue to develop highly efficient and cleaner powertrains that ensure improved emissions. New challenges due to changed regulatory boundaries and an evolving market environment have forced the Indian and global automotive community to rethink existing strategies and powertrain technologies. In the Indian context, the manner in which the industry leapfrogged from BS4 to BS6 regulations proves in multiple ways the quality and ingenuity of the Indian engineers. The next big ticket items on the industry's agenda are, of course, the RDE and CAFE norms. Even as improvements in internal combustion engines continue to be made, the industry has been working on several other options to offset CO2 emissions, be it electrification, CNG, LNG in commercial vehicle segment, or even hydrogen fuel cells. Over the next several years, the industry is likely to be dominated by radical changes occurring within the internal combustion engines as new engine management and optimization technologies and electrification address changes demanded by stringent regulations. In fact, major disruptions in powertrain are being led by computing power today more than horsepower. So what is the future of the powertrain as we know it? How do we build a sustainable, cleaner future? What is the transition going to be like in meeting the future demands of the powertrain? What are some of the critical innovations in this area? Ladies and gentlemen, it is these thoughts and questions that we want to explore in today's conference, the powertrain of the future. And I'd like to welcome each one of you to this conference, and I hope you have a lot of learning from the presentations and deliberations throughout the day. We are indeed honored today to have among us Dr. N Saravanan, President and Chief Technology Officer, Ashok Leyland, who will deliver the keynote address. Dr. Saravanan, welcome. We were also scheduled to join by Mr. Milind Peshave, VP and Head Power Systems Engineering, Tata Motors, in this inaugural session. But unfortunately, due to an urgent engagement, he had to drop out of this conference. Ladies and gentlemen, before we invite Dr. Saravanan, we would also like to welcome Mr. Kaushik Madhavan, independent consultant at Frost & Sullivan, to present perspectives on the global powertrain outlook 2022-23 and beyond. At the end of this session, should time permit, we would also like to take up some questions from you, our honorable delegates. So please do share your questions with us using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens, and I shall take them up at the end of this inaugural session. Thank you once again for participating in this conference. We truly appreciate your support. Without further ado, I would now like to call upon Mr. Kaushik Madhavan for his presentation on the global powertrain outlook for 2022-23 and beyond. Kaushik, over to you.
Thank you very much, Deepanshu. A very warm welcome, everyone. Very good morning to every one of you. It's good to see some familiar faces. Although Deepanshu, we did plan earlier to have this event in person. Hopefully, next time we'll be able to do that. But thank you very much once again, for giving us the opportunity to present at this wonderful event. I think powertrain of the future is something that everybody has been talking about. We have seen a lot of trends that have impacted the powertrain. So today, I'm going to spend a few minutes giving the viewers and the participants, who have joined this conference, a quick overview of what's happening globally. I have split my presentation into two sections. The first section is going to show you, how the global powertrain market is evolving. What are the driving forces? Deepanshu, you clearly mentioned about the need for fuel economy enhancement, CAFE targets. I'm going to touch upon that as well. The second section is a little bit about a few specific technology trends that are likely to play a big role in the next 5, 6, 7 years as we see powertrain technology improvements driving the automotive industry. Today, obviously, due to the nature of this particular event, and also considering the paucity of time, I'm going to focus a little bit on passenger vehicles largely. Although in the second section, when I talk about technology trends, they will be applicable to commercial vehicles as well. So don't focus primarily on the passenger vehicle segment itself. The idea is to look at technology trends that will have an impact across vehicle segments. So with that introduction, let me share my screen. Just give me a few seconds. Deepanshu, if you could confirm if my slides are visible.
Yeah, your screen is visible. You may proceed, please.
Excellent. Let me just minimize the control panel. Perfect. So thank you very much, Deepanshu, once again. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen. As I said before, the first section is to just give you an overview of how we see the global passenger car and light commercial vehicle powertrain market evolving. Now, if you look at some of the transformational shifts that are likely to impact the mobility industry, of course, mobility, when you talk about mobility industry, we will also have an impact. They will also have an impact on the passenger car market. And just the way customers, are going to perceive and live in the new world. When we talk about connected living, we talk about connected workspaces, connected homes, and connected vehicles, all coming together to talk about connected living, right? The era of intelligent assistants. Today, we are already seeing the likes of, Siri or Cortana. Well, I wouldn't use the word invading our lives, but something to that effect, who are going to become an integral part of the way we are going to live going forward. What's very important, in terms of a trend is a zero latency world. Today we are already talking about zero latency and the concept of zero world as well, right? As we innovate to zero. So what does innovating to zero mean, right? For example, from the automotive context, we are looking at innovating to zero accidents, zero fatalities, right? Zero downtime. Can we ever achieve zero downtime? I don't know. Maybe that's something to think about. But as we go forward, the idea or the concept of a zero world or innovating to zero is actually going to drive a lot of new technology. Zero emissions, of course, right? That's what is driving electrification today. And most importantly, customer behavior. Today, we are talking about the needs of a heterogeneous society. Gone are the days where we spoke about conventional methods of purchase and ownership of vehicles. Today, all we are talking about is new business models, right? How will new business models drive the mobility industry? Today, we are already talking about subscription-based models. We are talking about short-term leasing. Most importantly, of course, Dr. Saravanan is here today. From the commercial vehicle perspective, the pay as you use, right? A TCO based business model. I think that is going to drive a lot of the volumes in terms of how new vehicles are going to be developed and sold in the future. So, although I haven't spoken about all 12 transformational shifts in detail, what's very important is to note is that all conventional methods of using a vehicle, purchasing, owning, and disposing of a vehicle are not going to be relevant anymore. With digitization, with case ecosystem evolving, connected, autonomous, shared, and electric ecosystem evolving, we are going to see a lot more technology infused mobility world or technology infused vehicles as we go forward. Now, just a quick snapshot of how we see the GDP of select countries. Obviously, there are 3 bars that you can see for every country. The lightmost bar was the 2020 estimate. Obviously, everybody knows what happened in 2020 and early parts of 2021. But what's important is how 2022 and going forward, 2023 is going to look at. Something very positive to note here is that every country is seeing a positive recovery in terms of 2022 and 2022 and beyond. So I think that is going to be the way forward to 2023. We'll also probably see higher growth rates. Of course, this is in comparison to 2020 and 2021. So interesting points note here is that some of the emerging economies, of course, countries like, India or Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Brazil, these are likely to play a bigger role going forward when we talk about mobility and new business models. So countries to watch out for or regions to watch out for are these new emerging economies. Obviously, the established world, the likes of USA, Germany, United Kingdom, or Japan, they will continue to contribute, no doubt. But what's important to note here is how the emerging economies are going to contribute in a more significant manner to new technology developments and new business models in mobility space as we go forward. Now, a couple of interesting things, what did COVID do, right? Everybody knows about the semiconductor shortage today that has pretty much, brought the manufacturing ecosystem to a grinding halt or a big slowdown, if you may call it. It is likely to continue for the immediate short-term future. But having said that, with OEMs and suppliers making significant investment, both in terms of localizing their supply chain, investing more and more in regional sourcing, that is going to alleviate a lot of the challenges that the shortage of semiconductors has brought in today. What is also important is the OEMs are now prioritizing vehicles with higher profit margins, right? Now, if you look at the conventional powertrain vehicles, the likes of diesel engines or gasoline engine vehicles, it's a fairly mature market. Having said that, the profitability of newer generation vehicles, when we talk about xEVs, right? It could be a mild hybrid, could be a plug-in hybrid, could be fully electric as well, right? Or a full hybrid as well. So these new generation of xEVs, different forms of electrification, are offering higher profit margins to the OEMs. And if you look at it, perfect. So, continuing on some of the new developments that we can see, or in terms of trends, incentives and tax benefits. Obviously, we have seen a lot of incentivization when it comes to accelerating electric vehicle adoption, right? In specific countries, we have seen some very, very good examples in Europe and even in India as well. As part of the FAME 2 initiatives, we have seen some incentives being provided for accelerating EV adoption. But the question is, how can we incentivize and provide benefits across the value chain, right? Not only for the sales of electric vehicles, but right from incentivizing, companies who want to set up manufacturing facilities, right? Could be for components and aggregates, electric motors, batteries, battery management solutions. And to the other end of the value chain, what about servicing, aftermarket, sales infrastructure, and service infrastructure? So I think incentivizing across the value chain is going to become very, very important. And last but not the least, the IC engine phase out approach right? You have seen that certain cities in Europe have actually already announced deadlines or targets by which there is going to be no IC engine vehicles that are going to be sold in these cities. Are we likely to see something like that in India? Maybe yes, but maybe not right now, right? We are still a few years away before we can actually start making such proposals where we are going to say, hey, beyond this point in time, there will be no sales of IC engine vehicles. It's going to take a while, but it's important that we put a plan towards getting there. Now, Dipanshu, you spoke about this as well in your inaugural talk. CAFE norms, right? Today, we are already talking about how different regions are working together towards a world harmonized light truck protocol, or WLTP as we call it. It's very important that we work towards that because it's got multiple advantages. Now, from the OEM's perspective, they are now going to start developing vehicles that can be sold everywhere around the world. Till a few years ago, an OEM had to develop a vehicle only for a specific region because the emission norms and fuel economy norms were different. But if we have a harmonized WLTP, or a World Light Truck Protocol, the OEMs will now be able to manufacture anywhere in the world and sell anywhere in the world, right? I think this is going to play a big role in terms of how technology is going to evolve. It's going to be important to note that technology evolution is going to transcend regions, right? Gone are the days where we were looking at specific technology applications for regions in the world. But today, we are already talking about electrification technologies that can be applied anywhere else. So I think going forward, CAFE norms, I know we have, in India, we have just put our first set of norms. And needless to say, Europe, Japan, and California have led the way globally for many years, and that is going to continue. They will still be at the forefront of reducing, fuel-based emissions, reducing CO2 emissions, and improving fuel economy limits. We will see, the likes of India, Brazil also follow suit. But I must say that, India needs to catch up. I think we need to strengthen our CAFE regulations and CAFE norms. Because if we have to become a world leader in terms of reducing CO2 emissions or reducing fuel consumption or improving fuel economy, we need to bridge the gap. Thankfully, the government is very proactive in terms of bridging the gap with the Western nation when it comes to emission norms. I think we need to do something very similar with fuel economy norms as well. And I think we're going to get there. But the positive news is that India is catching up, and we will see more and more fuel economy based regulations coming into the picture, and that is going to drive technology evolution, within powertrain. Globally, how are we going to see 2022? We expect a 4.5% to 5% growth globally in comparison to 2021 when we talk about passenger vehicle and light vehicles, light commercial vehicle sales, right? So clubbed together as light vehicle sales, passenger cars, and some of the smaller light commercial vehicles as well. I mean, keep in mind, 2018, 2019, we were talking about 95 million vehicles. Pre-pandemic, pre-COVID, we were expecting to breach the 100 million mark by 2022, right? When we used to discuss this in 2018, 2019, about 3 or 4 years ago, we already thought that we are going to breach the 100 million mark by 2022 or 2023. Now look how the pandemic has affected us. It has set us back by 6, 7, 8 years now, right? So it is going to take another 4 or 5 years, maybe. If it happens earlier, fantastic. But it will take another 4 to 5 years before we start looking at breaching the 100 million mark, right? So I think that is what we need to focus on. The recovery is on track. That's the good news. We are expecting, like I said before, a growth from about 78 million units last year to about 82 million units this year. Hopefully, we will inch closer to the 90 million mark next year. But the positive news is that every region is contributing. If you look at the bars in the middle, split by regions, needless to say, Asia Pacific is going to become is going to be the biggest contributor. India, with let's say the expected 3.5 million passenger cars and light vehicle sales, is going to be one of the biggest contributors in terms of growth rate, right? But no surprises here. China and US are still going to be the two biggest contributors going forward. I think new business models, like I said before, is driving the growth. Also electrification, which we're going to talk about in a moment from now. Now, the same slide as I presented before, but with powertrain shown here. The last slide was split by regions. Here it's split by powertrain. If you look at the left bar, right, which is the 2021 bar, we had just about, let's say, let's say about 7 to 8 million vehicles from the xEVs. But in 2022, we expect that to be close to, right, 20 million units. About 18 to 19% of all the vehicle sales in 2022, by the end of 2022, will be some form of a hybrid or an electric, right? That's a big contribution. A few years ago, before the pandemic, we did not expect, right? We had not forecasted xEVs, right? Any form of electric or hybrid, could be mild, full, plug-in, fully electric, xEVs as we call it, right? We did not expect them to contribute in such a big manner, but the pandemic has actually accelerated electrification. So this year, like I said, 18.5 to 19% of all light vehicle sales will be some form of an electric or a hybrid. By 2025, we expect that number to be close to, or let's say between the 30 and 35% mark. So you can see how the acceleration of electrification or hybridization is actually driving the growth in powertrain technologies as well. And that is going to be the trend going forward, irrespective of regions. Every region is going to be similar, very focused towards investments in electric vehicle technologies, and that is going to be the flavor going forward. Just a couple of slides on how we expect the Indian powertrain outlook to be. To start with, to set the context, last year, the last quarter of 2021 was definitely below par in terms of sales volumes. Thankfully, the recovery is on track. The first 4 months of this year, has been positive, I would say, at least in terms of the customer sentiments, the OEMs bringing in new models across vehicle segments. The overall outlook has been positive. We do hope that 2022 is going to be a better year, much better year in comparison to 2021. But what's important is to look at the powertrain trends. Now, here's a comparison between 2020, 2021, and 2022. Gasoline is more or less constant, right? 65, 66, 67%, unlikely to change. What is changing significantly is the downward trend of diesel, right? So does that mean the green arrow that you see on the right side, which is essentially the increase in the share of xEVs, right? We have included alternate fuels as well here, just to give a positive spin. Is that happening at the cost of diesel? The answer to that question, at the outset seems yes. A lot of the shift from conventional powertrain towards electrification, be it any form of electric or hybrid, is happening at the cost of diesel. But does that mean gasoline is immune? No. We will see a lot of shift from gasoline IC engine vehicles towards electric vehicles as well. So going forward, it is going to be a combination of gasoline powered hybrids, right? Of course, diesel powered hybrids are going to be a lot more expensive. So we will see a lot more gasoline powered hybrids, could be mild, looking at what Maruti Suzuki has been doing, and also some of the other passenger vehicle OEMs have been doing. We will see a lot of gasoline based hybridization and electrification going forward. Alternate fuels, I happened to see Dr. Saravanan's press release, just a couple of days ago, a video as well, where he spoke about how alternate fuels are also going to be very important going forward for the commercial vehicle applications, right? So in my opinion, I think there is going to be a situation where all fuels will coexist. It's never going to be a case of one hat fits all or one fuel type dominating the other. So every fuel type, depending on its use case, will have an application going forward. The idea is to identify certain use cases and enhance investments in those use cases that are going to drive certain power sources or certain fuel sources that are going to be a niche application. Some of them will continue to be niche applications, no doubt. But the idea is to ensure that there is going to be a portfolio of fuel solutions going forward and not just one predominant solution driving the powertrain portfolio. EVs, of course, in India, obviously Tata Motors has been at the forefront of electrification in India. By the end of this year, we expect about 24 to 25,000 units of electric passenger cars to be sold, right? Last year, in 2021, that's about 15,500 units. We expect a significant growth, this year, almost a 50% growth, 50 to 55% growth this year, 24 to 25,000 units. Needless to say, like I said before, Tata Motors has been leading the way. But what is very important is we need more affordable mass market electric vehicles, right? If you look at the bar graph on the bottom right, you will see that apart from the top three, which have contributed to close to 15,000 units, all the other models available today, right, are premium models that are pretty much out of the reach of the common man, right? We need more and more vehicles. Of course, it is doing a lot of good to the market because it increases visibility. It improves customer confidence. It improves the overall sentiment in the market towards electric vehicles. People are now beginning to realize that electric vehicles are here to stay. Electric vehicles are going to become mainstream with the range that is being offered today. Today, we are already talking about, from the premium vehicles perspective, ranges of 600, 700 kilometers on a single charge. Tata Nexon has already spoken about 400, 450 kilometers on a single charge. But that is what we need today. We need people to believe that electric vehicles can become a viable alternative to their IC engine counterparts. And the only way to do that is to improve investment in charging infrastructure. We have seen identification of corridors across India, where we will see a lot more public charging infrastructure being put into place, especially between, let's say, two big cities. Chennai, Bangalore is a great example. Chennai, Trichy, Chennai, Madurai is a great example. Again, we are already seeing charging infrastructure being set up on these highways. So we need to have more investments in public charging infrastructure and making people believe that electric vehicles can become a mass market alternative. So I think that is what we are going to see in India going forward over the next 3 to 4 years. OEMs coming with longer range vehicles, right? And at the same time, the private public partnerships that are building in order to enhance and improve public charging infrastructure going forward. So second section, just to spend a few more minutes talking about a few technology trends that we see that are going to be very important going forward, globally, and also some of them from the Indian perspective. Snapshot first to look at all the possible technologies. When we talk about, I'm not going to spend time on each one of them in detail, but just to highlight some of the important ones. Diesel, when we talk about diesel, we have always seen a lot of investments in after treatment technology, right? We have seen DPF, SCR becoming more and more prevalent in the Indian market. We are already seeing, combination of multiple technologies, how some of the OEMs are bringing these two technologies together to have more affordable, cost-effective solutions going forward. Now, from the transmissions perspective, we are seeing technologies such as coasting idle, right? Coasting stop, sailing, right? These are technologies that are primarily aimed at improving fuel efficiency, right? Even in a two-pedal transmission ecosystem, DHTs or dedicated hybrid transmissions, where the electric motor is actually integrated into the housing of the automatic transmission, they are becoming more and more important. From space and packaging constraints, no doubt, because they can now be applied to smaller segment vehicles as well, but also the impact they have on fuel economy, right? Fuel saving. You're talking about fuel savings in the region of 15, 20% on hybridized transmissions or electrified transmissions by integrating electric motors into the transmission housing. In terms of electric all-wheel drive, we are already talking about electric motors being integrated into the drivetrain housing, right? Whether it could be the transfer case electrification, could be differential electrification, or integrating motors between the front and rear axle, right? So we will see a lot more electrification in the transmission and driveline segments. Needless to say, when we talk about electrification, we are also talking about, let's say, less than 60 volts and greater than 60 volts, right? So today, for the segment where we are seeing more than 60 volts, we are already seeing long driving ranges, especially for battery electric vehicles with higher battery capacity, with longer range, that are going to pretty much surpass your IC engine driving ranges, right? Today, we are already talking about 700, 800 kilometers on a single charge in North America and Europe, right? So we will see more of those vehicles coming in the Indian market too. Primarily, everything is going to revolve around energy and thermal management, right? That's what a powertrain efficiency improvement is all about, right? It could be in-cylinder improvements, variable valve train technologies, different combustion cycles being adopted. Atkinson and Miller are becoming very, very popular, by the way, now. Lean combustion has been there for a while. Cylinder deactivation, everything around in-cylinder combustion improvement. Then we are talking about loss reduction. We are already talking about how we can reduce thermal losses. How can we improve efficiency, right? Whether electrification or improvement of combustion, any of these technologies that are going to help achieve those small improvements, right, are going to play a big, big role. So keep in mind, it's not about revolutionary changes, it's about evolutionary changes. So small improvements put together can add up to a significant number. So this is what is driving, let's say, some of the technology improvements going forward, a combination of in-cylinder, pre-combustion, and post-combustion after treatment technologies as well. Now, electric motors, right? When we talk about electric motors, there are multiple parameters to talk about. You've got power density, you've got motor speed, motor efficiency. So if you look at the right side of this slide, let's say beyond 2025, we will see a significant improvement, not only in power density. We're talking about going from today's 12 to 15 kilowatts per liter to 55, 60 kilowatts, right? And even in terms of density, right, 4 to 5 kilowatt per kg. Like today, we are somewhere around 2.5 kilowatt per kg, going up to 6 kilowatt per kg. Just imagine what impact it can have on the driving range. So in the next 5 to 6 years, right, motor efficiency, and power density is going to drive improvements. Cost, of course, is going to see a significant drop as well. We are already seeing affordable electric motor technologies, but cost is always on a downward spiral. I think we are going to see a reduction not only in battery cost, but also electric motor cost, but also in battery cost as well. We have already seen LFP and NMC for automotive applications already breaching the $100 per kilowatt hour mark. By 2026, 2027, it could be as low as 87 to 88, maybe $90 per kilowatt hour. And that is going to be the target for many of the battery manufacturers going forward, right? Some motor technologies here. So we will see motors without rare earth elements, right? I mean, going forward, the need to develop technologies without having an adverse impact on the environment is going to be very, very important. So reduced or minimum, or in best case scenario, no rare earth metals is going to be the target for many of the motor manufacturers and OEMs today. Of course, some of the global OEMs like Renault, BMW are already doing that. And we need to ensure that any new technology that is going to be developed has very, very minimal or negligible impact on the environment going forward. Axial, the second technology, axial flux motors, right? Today, we are already talking about some of the OEMs like Mercedes-Benz or Renault who are looking at bringing axial flux technologies or axial flux motors into the market. Now, not only have they advantages in terms of power density, but also in terms of packaging and weight, right? Now we are able to bring these technologies to the smaller vehicle segments, right? The affordable vehicle segments where cost is going to play a big role. So affordability and reducing the threshold for adoption is going to be one of the key drivers for this market. The next technology, e-turbos, right, or e-compressors. In fact, I remember doing a study about 11 years ago or 12 years ago for one of the global turbocharger manufacturers. So they wanted to understand, this was already 11, 12 years ago, where how electrification of turbochargers or electrification of superchargers would impact the market. That was a time where fuel efficiency improvement, the focus on fuel efficiency improvement was quite high. Now we are seeing many of the OEMs commercializing these technologies. So we are already talking about electric motors integrated into the turbocharger housing or the supercharger housing. So essentially what you're doing is turbo lag, right, which was a big thing a couple of decades ago, is completely eliminated today, right? Today, with electrification of either turbochargers or compressors or superchargers, there is no turbo lag. And with very good transient performance, we are looking at turbochargers or electric turbos or electric compressors playing a big role in fuel efficiency improvements going forward. The next technology trends, twin dosing of SCR. Today, if you look at the mature market, it is still a single dose market, single dose SCR market. But Audi has already experimented the twin dose SCR, right? So primarily, of course, applicable for larger vehicles, SUVs, light commercial vehicles, or really large DE segment sedans. What is very important is how twin dosing is going to improve NOx emissions, right? In a big way. Globally today, one of the biggest challenges is to reduce NOx emissions as far as possible. And that's going to become stricter and stricter going forward. So any technology, IC engine technology, after treatment technologies that is going to help the OEM reduce NOx emissions is going to become very important. Transmission technologies, I'm not going to spend too much time on it. Just going to take another minute or two to wrap up. Number of gears is always going to increase. What is also important is in the CVT and the DCT space, how electrification is going to improve efficiency. So we will see again integration of electric motors within the transmission housing I spoke about before for both DCTs and CVTs. Couple of new innovative transmission technologies not mentioned here, IVTs or RVTs, reversible variable transmission. A company called Mazzaro in Europe recently signed an MOU with one of the OEMs to commercialize their transmission technology. So we will see more and more innovative transmission technologies as well. Cathode chemistries. Of course, everybody knows that NMC, both NMC 622, 811 will still be the primary chemistries going forward. But what is very important is how in the next 2 to 3 years, if you look at the bar graph on the right side, in the next 2 to 3 years towards 2024, 2025, NMCA or NCA with the incorporation of aluminum is going to become a new cathode chemistry as well. So very exciting space here, new cathode chemistries that are actually changing the way how batteries are going to be envisaged going forward. To summarize, clearly, different regions will adopt different technologies. Of course, the end goal is the same. The end goal is still moving towards electrification, improving fuel economy, reducing CO2 emissions. The end goal is the same, but the technology portfolio adopted to achieve this end goal is going to differ by region, right? Electrification, hybridization, European Union is still very gung-ho on that. The OEMs are very upbeat on introducing more and more full hybrid, plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, whereas United States will focus a lot more on electrification. We are already talking about fuel cells there, hydrogen there. Japan, CVTs, Japan was the pioneer in CVTs, will continue to be there. Apart from PHEVs, plug-in hybrids and battery electric vehicles we use India, we will see, like I said before, electrification at the cost of diesel, right? Diesel share, especially in the smaller compact passenger vehicles, will go down significantly. We will see more and more gasoline powered or gasoline hybrid powertrains coming forward. And needless to say, electric two-pedal transmissions gaining popularity. Today, we are already talking about, automatic transmissions, whether it is AMTs or DCTs or CVTs, proliferating these small, compact, entry-level segments, right? And that is going to be the trend forward. Affordability and comfort and convenience need not be exclusive, right? So we will see more and more affordable two-pedal transmission technologies being introduced in the commercial space, for passenger vehicle applications. So to summarize, going forward, the next 2 to 3 years are going to be very, very exciting from a powertrain perspective, right? Not only are we seeing more and more new technology innovations coming in, I spoke about that. What is also important is the investment in electrification, right? Whether it is new battery technologies, better battery chemistries, longer ranges, or public charging infrastructure. All the investments around the electrification space is geared towards improving customer sentiments. And the third pillar, of course, as we see more and more policies geared towards improving fuel economy, reducing CO2 emissions, state incentives, state policies, that is going to be the third pillar that is going to drive powertrain innovation. So with that, I'm going to stop. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I'm available through the next few hours. Please feel free to put your questions, in the Q&A panel. I'll try my best to answer them. So once again, thank you very much for your patient hearing. Dipanshu, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Madhavan. That was a wonderful session. And, as you said, we are going to save the environment. There's going to be a lot of investment in new technologies. And what I can make up from that is there are going to be a lot of new business models coming up and a lot of and very big opportunities as well. Ladies and gentlemen, now please put your hands together for Dr. N Saravanan, President and CTO, Ashok Leyland. I request Dr. N Saravanan to take the podium and deliver the keynote address for Powertrain of the Future event. Dr. Saravanan, all over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Am I audible?
You are, Dr.
Yes.
Saravanan.
Let me share my presentation. If you can just confirm that it is visible, then I can.
It is visible, Dr. Saravanan.
You're all set to go then? All right.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's always a pleasure to interact in this forum because there's an area where it's emerging. The more interaction we have, the better we are prepared for what lies ahead. So just a couple of things. Like most people here, I'm also clueless as to what the future is. So therefore, a big disclaimer. Whatever I say is sort of my views, nothing to do with what I personally see as a company and so on and so forth. Yeah. So basically, let's start with saying, what is the road beyond for us, right? I mean, I'm going to focus today primarily on commercial vehicles because that's where I sort of spend a lot of time. Some of it may apply to passenger cars, but I think that's not very relevant to discussion today. Just to sort of I want to give you guys a feel for what's happening. It's not just about technology, right? I think my belief, the whole challenge over the next 10 years, it's not a technology challenge at all. I do believe the new technology area, a lot of the OEMs in India are capable, as capable as any OEM anywhere in the world. So therefore, to me, it's not a technology challenge in the next 10 years. It's more of a challenge of ecosystem, challenge of developing ecosystems and how do they coexist with the existing ones and so on. How do we sort of convert customers? How do they transition, especially in commercial vehicles? How do they transition from one technology to the other? How do they have coexisting fleets with multiple technologies? What are the skill challenge, particularly in a country like India? There are new skills required for some of these technologies. How do we enable that? More often, from an OEM perspective, multiple challenges, right? We have to deal with multiple technologies, all the way from back-end technology management to front-end, including spares and service and parts and so on. I think Kaushik also pointed out the biggest challenge is going to be in terms of business model change. What used to be a sell a vehicle, forget it. It's no more going to be that way, especially new technologies, as I'll talk about them in the coming slides. The challenge is going to be the business model migrates from buying a vehicle to leasing a vehicle, paying per kilometer or hybrid model. So that's the biggest challenge. Yeah. So what do I see? So today I'm actually going to talk at a more higher level, talk about the, I would say fuel options, because that to me drives the powertrain options. I won't go to granular level like Kaushik did. I think he did a fantastic job. I don't want to repeat that. I'll talk at a very, very high level in terms of fuel options, and because that directly drives the powertrain options to a large extent. So what do I see in the next 10 years, right? I don't know. I'm putting together a whole bunch of options here. What you'll see is, I would call a messy decade of transition. It's going to be a mess for every one of us, where we'll have IC-based gasoline engines, diesel engines. You would start seeing a larger proliferation of LNG coming in, a larger migration of EVs in the bus segment, in the passenger car segment, and direct commercial vehicles. We'll have CNG proliferation where it's available. We'll also start seeing some hybrids and also small amounts of hydrogen-based, both fuel cell and hydrogen IC. So what is the challenge? The challenge is not, it's multifold, right? It's not about saying this will happen by this time. The challenge is, how do you figure out which technology will apply to which application? Even if you take a trucking application, a short haul may move towards EV, mid segment may move towards hydrogen ICE, and long haul may move towards hydrogen fuel cell, right? It's possibilities. Second question is, when will the transition start in each of these segments? And more importantly, what will be the pace of transition? And these are sort of the questions that one should start trying to understand. And that's sort of the key for us to be successful. Yeah. So what is the challenge, right? You might say, what is the big deal? I will work on all technologies and that will be end of it. I think the key challenge is these new powertrains, the success is not just depend on the technology and the OEM. A lot of it is depend on the ecosystem. Even if you look at from the left-hand side, if you took a battery electric vehicle, while it has good TCO to a large extent, you get, or if it's not there, it will get a TCO in the next 5-10 years from technology perspective because of battery costs going down and so on and so forth. A lot of it also depends on the availability of infrastructure. For example, it could be chargers. It's not just chargers, right? If you talk about passenger cars, you can get away with the lower power chargers. But talk about commercial vehicles, you want something that is about 150 kilowatt chargers and so on. So every technology that is in the pipeline has multiple challenges, all the way from just not just technology, but from the ecosystem perspective, partnership perspective, and so on. On the right-hand side, a little bit more granular level. So even if you look at a truck, for example, each application you can see has its own set of challenges. The last miles actually would, it's possible to go towards battery electric vehicles given the right circumstances because it's easier to manage the infrastructure and so on. Whereas a long haul, it's a much more challenge in terms of new technologies because you need to have the right infrastructure, sort of a packaging challenges and so on. So what's happening in India? I think I'm actually very glad to see that a lot of action is happening in India. A lot of both from policy perspective, regulation perspective, investment perspective. I think what we're seeing is it's not a question of if it will happen, it's a question of when, especially the migration away from the so-called fossil fuels to the clean fuels. Some of the things we're seeing are in the last 2 years, we actually seen a significant build out of CNG infrastructure. We're seeing significant investments in LNG happening. The FAME 2 subsidy continues, which actually drives a large amount of demand in the EV space. You're seeing a lot of commitments from major petroleum players, including Reliance and Adani's and IOCLs and so on, towards clean hydrogen, driving that sort of ecosystem. There's also a policy and mission announced by the government of India. You're also seeing a lot of seeding happening, especially by companies like IOCL and TPC, funding projects. It's unheard of before, right? The idea is to seed the market and see how it actually will pick up and so on. Also a push towards ethanol, methanol mix and biodiesel and so on. And more importantly, not just from ecosystem, but also from a supply, but also looking at supply chains, looking at localization. A lot of investments being put in place in terms of through PLI schemes, including for cell chemistry and auto sector and so on. So basically the bottom line is, I think the system is getting primed. It's a question of when it will happen, how it transition will happen. Right? So some of the key drivers, as I see it, what's driving these alternate fuel powertrains. Of course, if you look at the vision, each company has their own purpose and vision, right? Some companies may say I want to be top 10, or some others say I want to be sort of committed to ESG and so on. So that's a key driver from my perspective. Of course, the next is policy and regulations. From there comes all the way from emission-driven, CAFE-driven, heavy-duty fuel economy-driven, all the way to policies, incentives like PLI, PMP, FAME2, and so on and so forth. There are also ESG mandates that companies have to now meet, and also driven by local pollution mandates, and also possibility of carbon credit markets becoming more mature. That drives sort of the whole ecosystem. TCO is much better. From a customer perspective, you're starting to see, at least in the commercial vehicle space, large customers. It could be customers like Amazon, Flipkart, the geos demanding cleaner vehicles, right? Driven by their ESG commitments, decarbonization commitments, and so on. We're also seeing the advent of green funds being available, which drives sort of the financing options much better in the green energy space and so on. From a competition, of course, the competition is no more the traditional competition. It's actually anybody who has money is a competition now, right? I mean, I think, for example, I was talking to a colleague of mine, right? Who's the competition bus for us? Is it Tata Motors? Not really. It is a bodybuilder who can buy components from China and integrate and sell. So it is anybody who has technology. That's one level. Second level, you're also seeing a lot of deep tech players capturing a larger part of the pie. There are companies building out high technology fuel cells and battery packs, and they are actually also a competition to us. I think from ecosystem perspective, I think the key driver is once a case of once ecosystem is there, transitions happen quite fast. A good case is CNG. We've been doing CNG for years and years. Suddenly, when the build out happens, the cost structure is right. We saw a sudden shift in the certain segments to CNG very quickly. So that's a question. That's one more thing. I think finally, and probably as important as anything else, is sort of business models on how the OEMs capture the business models. For example, it's no more selling the vehicle. Customers are going to demand and say, give me a leased model, give me a pay per kilometer or hybrid model, and so on and so forth. So some of the drivers, as I see it, in this space. So can I make a prediction for the future? Absolutely not. But what I'm going to give you is sort of a menu of options. And I do hope that you guys will be able to work through your own logic, own sort of perspectives to get to where we are. Where I see it, as I said, currently it is more of a IC engine driven with some electrification and some CNG. It's going to be a whole mess of options in the next 10 years. What will come out at the end of it? I don't know. Hopefully a lot less options than where we're seeing it only in the next 10 years. Yeah, that's it's just one perspective. To give you a perspective on what potential options are mapped against sort of this from the commercial vehicle across the LCVs to heavy duty trucks and buses. At least I see two sort of competing options. One is IC driven options. The other is more of battery electric and fuel cell driven options. Just to sort of walk you through, for example, if you look at the first line, it is a battery electric vehicle. We see that penetration starting to happen in the smaller vehicles and maybe gradually making towards sort of the less than 15-ton ICVs for short haul. I see buses short haul for sure, and MD buses again with intracity. In the medium heavy duty trucks and long haul, maybe a little bit longer. I'm not saying it's impossible. There are more challenges. So there's one way of looking and saying, even if you look at it, you see almost every technology is sort of applicable everywhere. The key is niche segments. So what is a very, very homogeneous diesel gasoline market gets fragmented into 15, 20 different options. And that's a challenge. How do you work on so many technologies at the same time? How do you get it right? How do you get the TCO? Each has its own business models, right? So the combinations are phenomenally large. So it's not just everything straightforward. Just to give you a perspective, actually when you translate things into commercial vehicle sector, things get more complicated. It might be, for example, in the case of passenger vehicles, even if you say technology is there, cost is there, it is straightforward. But if you take the same battery technology into a commercial vehicle, of course, cost is challenge, supply chain is common challenges. A big challenge comes into charging time, right? Unlike a passenger car, where the customer may say, I'm actually driving in the daytime, nighttime, I can charge. A commercial vehicle drives 24/7. So what do we do in the charging time, right? Second is payload loss. As you start looking at heavier vehicles, looking at longer range, for example, if it's a 48-ton vehicle, for example, and a 1,000-kilometer range, the battery weight becomes six tons, right? And that's a payload loss. So there are the complexity becomes much more in a commercial vehicle than in a passenger vehicle. And in terms of networks, similarly, charging networks a little bit different. Similarly, in hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, not just question of supply chain and cost. You start dealing with complexity in the product itself. It's a EV plus a fuel cell. It's a chemical plus electrical things going on. So it's from a customer perspective. I mean, I think customer will they be able to use and drive the vehicle, service the vehicle as much as it does in a IC vehicle and so on. Then comes the challenge of hydrogen tank packaging and of course the hydrogen infrastructure. Similarly, hydrogen ICE, we have similar challenges. So my view is actually when you look at a vehicle perspective, as the GVW increases, the composite transition increases. And why do I say that? One is the number of options that are possible that actually may make sense explodes. If you look at GVW, the higher GVW, the more options make sense. For example, EV may make sense in a very, very short haul intracity. Hydrogenite makes sense maybe short to medium. CNG, LNG, of course, depending on the availability. Diesel, of course, the mainstay. Fuel cell, long haul. So unlike in a passenger vehicle, where you might actually say, you know what, maybe I'll have a gasoline-based moving towards EV and mild hybrids. As you go into higher GVW commercial vehicles, you end up actually exploding the option possibilities, and that adds to the complexity of transition. Second is, as I spoke briefly, especially for example, battery electric vehicles. The more range you want, longer range you want, the more payload loss you're starting to get, right? Again, challenge. Even if you say I'll go to hydrogen, the longer range you want, the longer it becomes very challenging to package hydrogen cylinders in a commercial vehicle. Yeah? So for 1,000 kilometer range on hydrogen, you end up half the vehicle is gone in hydrogen tanks, even if you look at refrigerated hydrogen. So charges also are different, right? In terms of commercial vehicle, you need to look at higher capacity charges. I'm not even including the various options of powertrain possibility in this. So we all take around all this. The worst place to be as OEM is in commercial vehicles. The transition is going to be challenging, and the options are endless. But I think at the same time, it is probably from engineering perspective, best time to be in the industry. So I'm not going to say this is an authoritative slide on what the trends are, but as you can see, now I'll just give you an example of what's happening in a BEV perspective. Technologies are, of course, migrating, but there's no way to say what will happen over the next 10 years. The transition will happen, but just to say that in every segment, from battery to charger, powertrains to motor, you're going to see a significant shift happening over the next 10 to 15 years. It's a question of what is suitable for us in what segments. It's sort of a $1,000 question. So, from my perspective, I think what I see, I think it's not about technology, right? I mean, I see the success factors for any OEM coming from multiple areas. One is how well they are able to partner. The reason I say that is, as an OEM, you have to work on multiple technologies. Each of them has significant investments that are required to be in place. So the smarter the OEM, or the smarter partnership that OEM can build, the better off they are. Because some of the investments also have a high risk in terms of actual, not just technical feasibility, but from a feasibility from an ecosystem perspective. So it's very important that OEMs look at partnerships as the key way to sort of deliver value in the next 10 years. Of course, technology plays a role, not just in powertrain, but overall technology. It could be vehicle technology. You might have to look at saying, do I need to change my vehicle platform itself to be better flexible for new fuels and so on and so forth. I'll give an example in the following slide on that. Of course, investments are the key. The OEMs who do the right frugal investments are ones to succeed. Of course, that's why I talked about having the right partnerships. To me, one of the key factors is also the people and the culture and the skills. A lot of the OEMs will have to move away from being stable, sort of this cruising sort of a culture into more of a agile, risk-taking, innovative culture, in my view, to be able to be successful in this new era of new powertrains coming up. Of course, finally, success factor important, the ecosystem. I'll just talk about a few of these in the next few slides. From a skills-wise, I mean, it's a whole bunch of skills, but I see 3 or 4 key areas of success, right? One is sort of skills in terms of next generation of powertrain. How do we get the skills into the battery pack making, if not cell making? How do we get in power electronics? How do we get them in more technology? How do we get them in terms of looking at a hydrogen engine, LNG engine, maybe a engine from synthetic fuel and so on and so forth. The next big is in the area of power electronics. As you start seeing increasing amount of electronics in the vehicle, this becomes critical, both not just in hardware, but also in the software perspective, because this could be the differentiating factor. And third comes the materials, primarily from a lightweighting perspective, at least in the commercial vehicle, because if you're going to lose advantage in payload, you have to compensate it somewhere. And the other way to look at it is, because if you can lightweight and save the amount of battery you're putting in a vehicle, you can tremendous advantage. So lightweighting becomes very critical in a commercial vehicle, especially with new technology, new energy options, and of course, finally, simulations. Whatever simulations you had learned on the diesel-based powertrains may not be that much useful when you move into new powertrain and so on. I just want to spend a few minutes on people and culture, what is required, in my view, to be able to meet the requirements you're seeing in terms of powertrain, right? I see the current companies, most OEMs, being stable, like on a cruise ship. Everybody's happy. They're looking at saying, I've done well. I met my BS6 norms and so on and so forth. What is the big deal? Yes, it has allowed us to be where we are, right? But I think the challenge is competition, unknown. It's not about known, it's unknown competition that actually is going to follow us. So where do we need to transform to, in my view, sort of more into a stable, but more a battleship mode, right? We have to be aggressive, at the same time, flexible, right? The only way we'll succeed in technology is experiment, fail, retry, again, succeed or fail, again, retry. So we need to get in the mindset of being in a stable environment to being in an unstable environment and dealing with it in a very, very innovative, frugal, and agile way. That sort of would be, from my perspective, the most important success factor for a company going forward. And another area I spoke about was briefly, if you look at technologies that are coming up, you want to talk about one side, IC-based engines, that is hydrogen fuel cell, LNG, CNG, other side, battery electric fuel cell, and so forth. So how does a company deal with such technologies, right? And they're not going to be in high volume businesses. They'll all be high mix, low volume. There are multiple variants. So one, I believe strongly, one approach could be using modularity as a concept to deliver these technologies. Right? As an example, I'll show you animation of in a modular truck, how it is possible to change powertrain options fairly quickly. And this is sort of, this is a typical diesel truck. Yeah. Take the diesel truck, if it's modular, you remove the diesel components, which is primarily in this case, the fuel tanks and the diesel engine replaced with LNG. You have 80% commonality in chassis, you get a CNG vehicle. Same thing, the LNG tanks, modified LNG exhaust system and a slight tube to the engine becomes LNG truck. Same thing, hydrogen ICE, hydrogen tanks, hydrogen engine becomes hydrogen ICE. A little bit more modification, but I think not too much change, other change systems and so on. You get a fuel cell electric truck. Similarly, battery electric vehicle, since it's modular, you get across the board multiple options. So basically the idea is you have so much of uncertainty in what's going to happen. You have so much need flexibility, and one way that OEMs can look at is look at modularity of the vehicle architectures going forward. The other aspect is in terms of building ecosystems. This is an example of what could an EV ecosystem look like. It could be a combination of suppliers in terms of not just tactical, but strategic suppliers across the board. It could be development partners, because technologies are going to be changing. How to get the right development partner in all areas. The third critical important is in digital space. How to sort of make the whole vehicle adoption digital, because the selling models move from buying to leasing and so on and so forth. How do I make sure that I have the right set of analytics, MIA, best techniques to be able to look at that and look at the profitability of that. And of course, then you move to EMAS. A lot of these segments could move towards mobility as a service. How do I manage that? Not just from finance perspective, but from overall technology perspective. Next, in the finance, how do I sort of finance these lease models and so on and so forth. and then it could be power, both infra and charging infra and so on and so forth. So just to end my talk, so is the world going to be challenging? Absolutely. How do we deal with it? I personally believe the best way to make the future is to create the future. And I wanted to thank everyone for the opportunity for giving out my thoughts on this topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. N Saravanan. That was a wonderful, wonderful, engaging talk.